Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, aviation aficionados from coast to coast. I'm Jamie Beckett, the AOPA Foundation. You Can Fly Ambassador for the East Coast of the United States. And I want to tell you, on a Tuesday night, September 13th, 7 o'clock on the East Coast, we're going to do Ask an Ambassador like we do on the second and fourth Tuesdays of each month. And shortly, I will be joined by my pals. But first, I need to set this up. I was born and well, actually, I was not born there, but I grew up in the suburbs of Hartford, Connecticut, and there are two major industries in that area. One was Pratt Whitney, the aircraft engine manufacturer, and it seemed like every third kid's dad worked at Pratt Whitney. The other is the insurance industry. Hartford, Connecticut was and is the insurance capital of the world. So tonight is the perfect time for us to bring together the aviation industry and the insurance industry and talk about it in great depth. And we're going to do that with my good pal, Kay Sunrum from the West Coast of the United States and Pat Brown, who's filling in from Texas. Kay and Pat, aren't you glad we've already got AirJ online? Otherwise, wouldn't it be silly for us to be sitting here?
I live for that, Jamie.
Well, hey, as always, we have a topic. We're going to talk about insurance for aviation and in many forms. Trust me, this is not going to be as boring as that life insurance guy that comes around to your house now and then. This is going to be kind of interesting. But I don't know. I don't think we can really get specific with numbers, but we can talk about concepts on this. And of course, you can ask any question you want on any topic, especially if you want Pat to read regulations, because that's what he does as a hobby. He really does. Hey, Kay, you've been an aircraft owner in your life and you've been a pilot for a number of years. Do you carry insurance and I'm not talking about values, but do you carry any particular types of insurance for the things you do?
I do. So as an aircraft owner, I have what's called owner's insurance, and it actually covers you for non-owned insurance, which is also known as renter's insurance. So prior to being an aircraft owner, I had just renter's insurance. But once I obtained an airplane and I changed the policy, it covers me for both. And so with this one policy, I have the required component, which is the property damage and the bodily injury, the liability portion. And then aircraft hull insurance. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And so this is something that you really just need to dive right in. And it's not as complicated as people think it is, but you do need to get into the weeds, understand, well, what does the property damage cover me for? What does bodily injury cover me for if the aircraft gets damaged? And I want to use an example, if I may, because I know some people are very well versed in insurance and others are not. But let's just say that you have an emergency and you have to land the airplane and there's this beautiful golf course. So you land on the golf course, but unfortunately your wing hits a golfer on the way down. All right. So the golfer is injured. Your passenger gets some injury on their neck. So they're injured. And then you have just shredded the golf course, the grass there. So there's damage to the golf course and there's damage to your airplane. So the first three are all part of that liability piece of it. And then the hull insurance is going to cover your aircraft. So you need to know what your limits are and be adequately covered. And so that's what I've done for my airplane, whether I own it or I go and I rent an airplane. But you look at the different components. There's the passenger, there's the golfer, there's the golf course, and there's the aircraft. So your insurance should cover all of those components.
Yeah, there's insurance for everything. There's something you can buy. And Pat, I'm going to come to you with Jerry Fan's question because it's a really good one. Big question from Jerry is there insurance for 80-year-olds? And, this is one of the challenges because the FAA has their rules, but the insurance company has theirs. Have you dealt with this much, Pat?
Well, given the fact that I'm a few years away from 80, not personally, but I have two good friends, both of whom are, respectively 81 and 83. And the 83-year-old a couple of years ago was turned down for insurance on his Bonanza So he sold his Bonanza in A36, and he bought a Cardinal, it's Cessna 177 Cardinal. And while the insurance is expensive, it's about $3,400. He has insurance, and it's liability and hull coverage. The other friend of mine is 80, I guess he's 81, and he owns a Mooney. There's a retract. Now, it's an older Mooney that has a Johnson bar on it, so it's pretty obvious if the gear is up or down, but he is beginning to have some problems finding somebody that's willing to write the policy, despite the fact that he's an ex-fighter pilot and in excellent condition with multi-thousands of hours in big airplanes and fighter jets and things like that. But the insurance companies don't look at that experience. They look at 80.
Yeah. I've run into that with people who have bought light sport aircraft because they just don't want to do the medical part anymore. And they get to 70 or 80. And the FAA says, yeah, you can fly. You don't need a medical. But then the insurance company says, yeah, you do. And that's the difference. The FAA has their rules. The insurance company has theirs. And Chris Ruff has a really interesting question. And I know we've all come in contact with this. He's talking about a three-owner, a co-owned aircraft. The rates seem to be set by the least experienced tailwheel pilot. Is it typical for the rate to stay the same until the last guy gets 100 hours of tailwheel? Kay, I've always found that shopping. Oh, I'm sorry, Pat. Do you have something to throw in there? Go ahead. I defer to your greatness.
Well, the only reason that I raised my hand there is because actually that very situation is in play right this minute with me. I had a partnership in a beautiful decathlon, Super D, and I recently sold it because I just wasn't flying it as much as I flew it 12 hours last year. So I sold it to a gentleman who has about 30 hours of tailwheel time. The current carrier, the current underwriter, wanted him to have 10 hours of dual and charge an extra $1,000 on the premium. And okay, I understand that, but he would have been just perfectly fine with 5 hours of dual or 3 or 4 even. So as a group, there are 4 of them in that partnership, they decided that they'd go look elsewhere, and they got a quote for $1,000 less and only 1 hour with a CFI. So the rates and the requirements can vary greatly from insurance company to insurance company for the same airplane and the same experience level. Now, I will say this: in my experience, it has been that if you can get insurance for, let's say, a Mooney or a Bonanza or something like that, and you don't have a lot of retract time, that first year's premium is generally pretty healthy. But if you get a year under your belt, if you get your instrument rating, then generally speaking, in subsequent years, that premium will actually go down or can go down. We reinsured our Comanche. We just paid the premium a few months ago, and actually, believe it or not, for a retract, and for 2 of us who are both, I'll just say, not real young, our insurance actually went down $500 a year, and that's unheard of in today's insurance market.
Yeah, the insurance can be a little interesting. You know, I think we've talked about this in the past, but I almost bought an RV9, a Vans RV9 this past year. And there were a variety of reasons I didn't, but one of the compelling ones was my insurance wanted me to have 10 hours with an instructor in type. And I couldn't find an instructor who had any time in an RV9. And, you know, I know that seems like a goofy reason, but I just could not get the insurance. And for me, that was like, okay, I'm not going to fly it uninsured for 10 hours and see what happens. Kay, have you ever run into any of this with maybe a co-ownership or a flying club where they're priced at the level of the lowest time pilot?
I absolutely have. You know, they say that the underwriters write it to the weakest link, if you want to call it, the least experienced pilot. And you could have 99 CFIs in a flying club and 1 student pilot, or in an ownership. I'm just exaggerating here. A number of CFIs and 1 student pilot, but that policy is going to be written to whoever is the least experienced. And that's what I've seen no matter where you shop around. However, there are a lot of discounts that can be applied. And so when you are looking for insurance, get a few quotes and make sure that you're actually, talking to the individuals. And if it's a broker, that's great. Make sure that you have that conversation and you let them know, all right, hey, I've taken a lot of these safety seminars and I am part of the WINGS program, and I have all of these credits with Air Safety Institute. You can get 5% here or 10% there, all these discounts, and that adds up. So the devil's really in the details, but make sure that you're comparing apples to apples when you are shopping around. And unfortunately, there's no way to get around. If you don't have experience, you're just going to have to bite the bullet and pay that extra premium until you get that experience. I had to do that when I transitioned to a high performance airplane, and my insurance that first year was a little bit more. And I think I had about 5 hours in that airplane. And once I did get the transition training completed, I sent that certificate in, and that brought my insurance down a little bit. And that's pretty much the way that all the big insurance companies are going to do that.
Hey, and let's bring the audience in on this a little better. And by the way, Doug Miller says hi to all of us. So I'm saying back to hi to Doug on behalf of all of us. Give me a response there in the comments. Are you an owner, a renter, or in a club? What's your access for getting access to an airplane? For anyone who's watching, are you an owner, a renter, or a club? Just put that one word in and we'll take it from there. Pat, I'm sorry, go ahead. You had your hand raised? Is that you were being polite?
I didn't want to just jump in. I want to just elaborate a little bit on what Kay said. She's right about getting various quotes, but here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to go to 2 or 3 or 4 different brokers and say, give me some quotes. Because what happens is these brokers generally represent more than one underwriter. And invariably, you will have brokers that represent the same underwriters. You might go to 2 or 3 different brokers and they might have 2 or 3 or 4 underwriters in common. Well, if all 3 or 4 of those brokers go to a half a dozen underwriters and there's 4 or 5 underwriters that they have in common, all these insurance companies know when a quote is out because it's registered in some sort of a database. But these people know that there are quotes out there, and it will bollocks up the works way more than you want. There's only one insurance company that I'm aware of out there right now that's a direct writer, and that's a Vimco. So that would be the exception to the rule. You could go to a Vimco and ask for a quote, and then go to a broker and see if he can get you a quote. But pick a broker that you like, pick a broker that you trust, pick a broker that your best pilot buddy recommends and is happy with, and then have that broker go out to the market, which will be multiple insurance companies, and just hold that broker's feet to the fire to get the best price that you can. There are always exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, you don't want to try to go to multiple brokers and just play one against the other. That strategy doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree with you, Pat. And in my experience, with the half dozen airplanes I've owned, I do have a broker that I have a good relationship with, and I always call them and I always give them the information. They shop it around and they come back with 2 or 3 prices and coverages. I pick one. I also stick with that one for as long as I own the airplane. One of the things and I've never had this experience, but it's one of the things I've been cautioned about over the course of my career. If you keep jumping from insurer to insurer to get a lower price, year after year, they feel no loyalty to you either. So if you ever make a claim, that may be the last one you ever make with that company. Kay, have you ever either made a claim, and no specifics, or have you heard similar things where you really do want to stick with your insurer long term?
I agree with you on that. You absolutely want to develop that relationship. And no, I have not filed a claim. However, I do want to put in a plug for AOPA Strategic Partner, which is Assured Partners. And I think we have a link here we want to put up.
There it is.
Yeah, so check them out. They are one of the largest brokers there, and they will provide you general aviation insurance for everything. All right, they really are big guns. And so I enjoy working with them because I tend to ask a lot of questions. And, when I was a renter for a long time, and when you switch to being an owner, or you want a CFI policy, there's a lot of different policies, or a hanger insurance. You're going to have questions, and all those insurance policies are not the same. And so I like being able to call them and just ask away with the questions. And they're very, very knowledgeable. And as a broker, they shop around for me. And Pat, thank you for clarifying that. When I made that comment initially, I meant if you are going to direct a broker, then it's important to make sure that you're making a few phone calls. But Assured Partners, can't say enough about them. I have found it to be really easy to get all that information, because there is a learning curve. And if you haven't done this before, you want to understand those details. And so check them out, and you'll be thankful. One other thing I want to mention about them is they have these great brochures. If you go to that website that we put up, you can find this one. You do have to request it on their website, and they'll send you it. And I did this about a year ago or so. There is this booklet here for owners, aircraft insurance, and then they have the same one for renter. And it has a whole bunch of information on what are the different types of insurance out there, and definitions and common terms, and what does it mean when a sublimit is per passenger versus per person. You got to know those details. It's one word difference, but it makes a huge difference. So check out those booklets online.
I got to say, by the way, I am blown away by how many of our viewers right now are owners. And we've got some renters. Even Ingram Leedy is a renter in a club right now, but he is going to be an owner. And I like that confidence. I'm going to be buying an airplane. I'm going to be stepping into this as an owner. So we'll cover some more of that, because there is some great stuff here. And seriously, hang on, because we're going to get into some stuff about how you make sure your insurance is actually going to cover you. AirJ asked, Pat, I'm coming to you because you're the regulation guy. Does your premium get lower with each rating you achieve or the hours you obtain? Pat, I'm throwing that to you. I have an opinion, but I want to see if you're in line with me.
The answer is a definite and unequivocal maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
And really, but that really is the answer. It really depends. It depends on there's so many things that go into it. What kind of airplane are you flying? Are you flying one of these kind of orphan airplanes that maybe doesn't have an owner's group, or where parts become issues? Are you flying something like a Marchetti, which is a hot shot Italian fighter trainer piston driven airplane that's fully aerobatic? It's all risk based. It is all risk based. And if the insurance company perceives that you are flying an airplane that's going to cost a bloody fortune to fix if you prang it, then I don't care what your experience level is, more than likely that's not going to help you very much. So once again, in all seriousness, the answer is maybe not.
Yeah, that's true, because as you say, the complexity of it is, what are you flying? What is your experience level? I used to own a experimental twin tail dragger, and the insurance on that, the liability was very inexpensive. The hull was very expensive. Maybe that would have changed over time. Maybe it wouldn't have, but that is one of the things you look at. Even the airplane I'm buying, is it a retractable or a fixed gear? That's going to affect your insurance rate. There's so many things. So AirJ, we're not trying to dodge you, but that is where you can develop a relationship with a broker and talk to them about where you are, where you want to go, what your goals are. They may be able to give you some insight that makes it work for you. Connor Wilder says, any idea how I can balance flight training and studying with a full-time job? Kay, I believe you're an active flight instructor, somebody who's got some insight into this sort of thing, and just achieved a new plateau as an instructor. Why don't you tell Connor what you think about balancing full-time flight training and a full-time job?
Sure. Well, as Jamie just said, I was a student. We're all students, always. A good pilot is always learning, right? And so I went through my CIRRUS instructor certificate. So I'm a training center instructor. They call it a TCI, and it reminded me of the discipline that you absolutely need to have when you are a student. And so My biggest recommendation is take it in chunks. Don't procrastinate. Don't save all these things right before your flight. Do things little by little. And so set a schedule and make sure that you have time for your flights and for your ground sessions, your chair flying. I did a lot of chair flying. I absolutely sat in plane by myself with a ground power unit connected and just sat there going through the motions, and it's shaved off a lot of time for me personally. But the biggest thing is schedule it like it's a doctor's appointment. If you want to get this accomplished, you absolutely need to set SMART goals. We had a session on this. I think, Pat, you and I did this several months ago about SMART goals. So go back and you can take a look at that in our YouTube history there. We do have an entire session on that. But I encourage you to really be deliberate about it. It's hard to balance things and life gets in the way and your training can go on and on and on. So schedule it and then make sure that you're taking things in small pieces. That's what really helped me get through this. And the cramming just never works. You really want to get that higher level of learning, not the route memory, but be able to assimilate what you've learned in the textbook to real life. And that comes with some practice. And so that's why cramming things together, it's never an effective way of learning. So wish you the best of luck. Again, schedule it and be real disciplined about taking it in small chunks.
I like that. I like that a lot. And Pat, we've got a question from Robert Donahue I want to throw to you. And I'm not saying why, Pat. I'm just not going to say that. But Robert writes in, do you have any advice for pilots 70 years old to maintain insurability? Do you know what any of those words mean? Because I'm confused.
Let me get my bifocals focused here. So no, fly a lot. And I mean, fly a lot. If you're, like it or not, the insurance companies look at septuagenarians. I think that's the 70-year-olds. They look at that group of people as a higher risk, and the older you get, the higher the risk they seem to think is the case. But fly a lot. I don't mean a couple hours a month. If you can afford it, fly more than that. I can't give you a hard number, but boy, if you can fly 100 hours a year, or somewhere in that general ballpark, you're going to be in better shape than if you fly once a month for an hour for a hamburger or something. And the other thing is avail yourself of as much online training as you can. The FAST team has a lot of really good webinars on FAAsafety.gov. AOPA has a tremendous library of wings credit courses, as does FAAsafety.gov. Any live events that you can go to or log into. Every time I fill out an insurance update for my policy, there's a question on there that, in fact, this actually just came in the mail a couple of days ago. This is to update my non-owner policy, even though I own an airplane by myself, and because of that, it covers me on other airplanes. I also carry a non-owner policy just for additional coverage. But one of the questions is FAST Team Wings Knowledge Course name and completion date, and right under that, describe recurrency training within the last 12 months. So by that, they're talking about IPCs, flight reviews, any kind of wings credit type of courses. A Rusty Pilot, for example, is you can get wings credit for that. So anything that you can do to show the insurance company that you are you're serious about what you're doing, and you're taking steps to mitigate that mythical age that after which we become dangerous, then that's really about the only answer I can give you. You got to fly a lot, and you got to keep training.
That's really good advice, Pat, because one of the standard series of questions on an insurance form, total hours in the last 90 days, hours in the last 12 months. That's not a random series of questions. They're trying to find out how proficient are you, because that's directly going to affect their payouts from their perspective. So since we've got so many owners, let's talk about something that is an owner area, which is insurance is a contract for payment. It's a financial arrangement. I have an issue and I've made my payments on time and I follow all the rules and they make me whole. Like Kay was talking about, they fix the golf course, they pay the medical bills, they get the airplane fixed or moved or whatever. But you have to follow the rules. And Kay, this is one of the things where I think people can get a little slack at times, not because they don't care, maybe because they don't know. But if your airplane's out of annual and you were flying it and you have a problem, they're not going to cover you. If you're outside your flight review or your medical and you have a problem, they're not going to cover you. And I deal with this a lot when I teach rusty pilots or non-towered airport ops. If you enter a non-towered airport in the wrong pattern and end up swapping paint with somebody, the insurance company's probably going to say, oh, you violated 9113 and 91126. And since you weren't following the rules, we don't cover this. That's a real issue for an owner, isn't it? Okay. Because now there's things, maintenance things and regulatory things you really have to pay attention to.
Correct. I said it earlier that, the devil's in the details, and this is where like you said, Jamie, it's a contract. And with any other contract, we always read it before we sign, right? Or hopefully we do. And this is not any different. And so you need to understand what the insurance companies, what they expect of you, and that you're in compliance. And this is not, willy-nilly business. So you got to cross your T's and dot your I's. And if that flight review expires on the 31st of the month, then don't go and fly on the 1st. You're not covered. And so you need to make sure that you keep track of all of your obligations to the insurance company, because otherwise they don't, like you said, they don't need to pay. And it's incumbent on you to know what are the, the right things to do. And I love that example that you gave on with a non-towered field. If you don't operate properly, they could very well come back and say, hey, you're not in compliance with the FARs. The other thing is medical, right? So we never ever fly without a valid, medical, because your insurance is not going to cover you, because that's one of those three things: that your pilot certificate, your medical, and your flight review. So and then any other obligations that you have to show that you are a proficient pilot. The one other comment I want to make about the recency of experience that we were talking about. I have seen that a lot of experienced pilots tend to think that they can let a lot more time go by and still not be rusty. And I want to say, and I think I speak for all three of us, that's not true. So just because you may have 10, 20, 30 years of experience doesn't mean that you can let a whole year go by and not go flying. You're always a student. I said that earlier. And so don't get to the point where you feel like I'm an experienced pilot and I don't need to go do those 3 takeoffs and landings before I carry my passengers, because I've done so many landings. It just doesn't work that way. And so we need to be real humble when we get into that cockpit.
Yeah. And you bring up an interesting point about taking a long period of time off. Frankly, if I take a month off, I run through that checklist another couple times. I slow way down and make sure everything's going okay. Very often we'll hear complaints about insurance costs. Understandably, they can go up and it can become a challenge, but in a very real sense, those insurance costs are things we have some input on, because there's a fairly small pool of insurance providers. So if we start doing our gums check religiously so we don't land gear up, if we start preparing for our flights so we don't land on that closed runway and tear the gear off, if we do the things we have to do that keep us safe, then there are fewer payouts and the insurance rates come down, because those things are tied together. Pat, maybe the best way to do that is just education, whether that's going to wings forums, that's joining a pilot group, a flyout group or something that gives you a reason to fly out, people to interact with. But there really is a direct link between the accidents and incidents we have and the cost of our insurance, isn't there?
Yeah, and because the three of us work for AOPA, and I suspect you guys are on the same mailing list that I am, and every every weekday morning, I get an email that talks about things that happened the day before in aviation. So it might be the announcement of the 100 low lead equivalent or something along those lines. But typically down at the very bottom of that email are links to all of the aircraft accidents that happened the day before. And I remember thinking, this was what's today? Today's Tuesday. I think Friday, I saw the report, and there was only one aircraft accident that was listed. And I can't tell you when the last time was that there was only one. And I'd be really hard pressed to tell you the last time there was zero. That's how rare it is. Normally, it's 3 to 5, and a number of them are fatal. And they're usually just stupid pilot tricks, running out of gas or running into weather or forgetting to put the gear up or down or whatever the case may be. Most of them are just stupid pilot tricks. Very few of them are, well, the engine quit. And does that happen? Of course it does. But very few of them are mechanical in nature. And so folks, when our insurance rates go up, all you got to do is look in the mirror, because it's us. We're our own worst enemies because we don't do things like follow checklists and engage in recurrent training, and realize that those 4 cardinal sins: arrogance, ignorance, complacency, and distractions. I talk about those in our, I do, I know you guys do too, in our Rusty Pilots. We talk about the causes of airplane accidents. If you look at the NTSB and just any random general aviation accident report, you're going to find one or more of these things: arrogance, ignorance, complacency, and or distractions. One or more of those is going to be evident, and every one of them we have some control over.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough for saying that, because it's absolutely true, Pat. And if we all took that attitude and didn't be flying in and say, well, I don't need to talk on the radio, so I'm not gonna. I have one, I'm just not gonna. Or I'm flying straight in because I can. I realize there's 4 other people in the pattern, but I'm just gonna fly straight in. That's where things get a little weird, and that's where accidents come from. And that's where our rates go up. Let's talk about some specifics. Kay, you mentioned this earlier. Let's talk about just liability insurance. And I think most people are aware of it because we have it on our cars, but airplane insurance and car insurance is very different. The terminology is different, but what specifically is liability insurance for on my airplane, the airplane I own, because we've got so many owners here? What's that liability policy cover?
So I'm going to go back to that example that I mentioned earlier with the emergency landing on the golf course. So the liability insurance is going to cover the property damage and bodily injury. So if we look at the passenger that hurt the neck, right? There might be medical payments. There might be other issues related to that accident. So they will cover that. They will cover the golfer that was on the course. And then they're going to cover the property damage to the golf course. So all of that, it comes from your liability piece of it. Then there is the aircraft, hull insurance, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But those 3 components are going to be covered by the liability.
I like that. And Christopher Ritchie's got an interesting point here. He says some insurance companies will only cover hard service landings and not soft field, and sometimes with a flight instructor on board for the soft field. Insurance is kind of custom made to what you need. So you can have a conversation about what you're doing, and the insurance company will tell you, we're okay with you doing this, we're not okay with you doing that. And as Pat was talking about before, if we're insuring a Cessna 150 with relatively low horsepower, fixed pitch prop, welded down gear, insurance is relatively inexpensive. If we're insuring an Icon A5, an amphibious aircraft, which a pusher, it's relatively new on the market, it's got a much higher hull value, that's going to be more expensive. So it's worth having that conversation. And because I use the term hull insurance, Pat, I'm throwing you in the deep end of the pool. It's what I do. Hull insurance is not something that the average person understands, because there is no equivalent to it in cars, really. Well, there is, but we don't use that term. Have you ever had hull insurance on one of your aircraft? And can you explain what it is?
It's basically the insurance on the airframe itself. They call it hull insurance. It's basically it's the airframe. So if you and it's attached components, by the way. So if you ding a prop, that's going to come out of your hull insurance. If you taxi off the runway and hit a landing light, of course your liability will cover the damage to the landing light, or the runway light or whatever. But your hull insurance, let's say that you damage the nose strut on your airplane, your hull insurance will step in and pay for that. So basically, the hull insurance covers the physical airplane itself, and it's a really interesting thing about that insurance. You know, when we buy automobile insurance, let's say that you just bought a brand new Acura, you're going to insure the car. And the minute you drive it off the lot, it's going to lose 30% of its value. And every year it's going to lose some percent of its value until there's really not much left. But your insurance premiums probably stay reasonably close to the same, despite the fact that the value of the car is perhaps dropped dramatically. With an airplane, if you insure it for $100,000, it doesn't matter how old the airplane is or how many years you've had it. If you insure it for $100,000 and it's totaled, you're going to get $100,000. There's no depreciation involved. You will get the check for $100,000. So that's a big difference right there.
I like it. Thank you, Pat. Insightful as always, and so attractive. Yes, Kay, what would you like to add to this?
I wanted to add one thing that Pat said about the hull insurance. So it's really important that you pick the right number, what you want to insure the aircraft, because if you over insure thinking, oh, you know what, I got this 172, it's really worth 100,000, but I'm going to insure it for 200,000 because if I get into an accident, I'm going to get a check for 200,000. And it doesn't work that way, because then the insurance company is going to basically be forced to repair it. They're not going to give you $200,000 for an airplane that they know is worth only 100,000. They're going to try and repair it, and you're going to have to live with that damage history and the possibility of not being able to sell it again for the same price that you would be able to sell it if it didn't have any damage history. Now, if you underinsure your airplane, you got another problem there, because then they're going to want to just write you that check rather than having, to fix all that. So there's a fine balance, and this is where it's important to understand aircraft valuation and get the proper hull amount.
Yeah, that's true. Ingram Leedy asks, are there additional issues related to flying international, over water, or possibly unsafe FBOs? Ingram, I know this sounds like a cop-out. I'm going to say those are questions you want to talk to your broker or your insurance agent about. There may be special aspects to the insurance policy that can add in riders or whatever. You'd be surprised how you can customize. I think there's somebody on TV that does that. But anyhow, Christopher Ritchie asks, what about insurance you get when you lease back your airplane to a flight school? Great question with a really interesting answer. You can't have two insurance policies on the same airplane. So if you're leasing your airplane to the flight school, they're now taking possession of it, and they are essentially operating as the owner of that airplane, even though you are. Their insurance covers that airplane. You don't. This is the same as if you lease an airplane to a flying club. The club then has to insure it. You do not. Now, you can include in your lease, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, Pat or Kay, you can include in your lease with the school or the club what value you want that insured at, or whether it carries hull or just liability. But you can't have two policies on the same airplane. So when you lease it to someone else, the insurance is their problem. We got thumbs up on that? I like it. Oh, I feel good when I'm right. I really do.
It's so rare.
I don't think it happened this week. Pat, I'm coming to you just because you were rude to me and now you deserve it. Le Capitan says, how's the insurance deal with owners with multi-accidents in 1 year? What's the effect on the annual insurance bill? I know this is a short answer, but I'll throw it to you anyhow.
You're probably not going to like the answer, because it depends. What are the circumstances surrounding the multiple accidents? Were you landing in a retractable gear airplane and you had a mechanical failure that caused the gear to collapse? That's that's not your fault. You happen to be flying the airplane when it happened, but that's not your fault. That's just the first example that comes to mind. But I was a real active tow pilot at our glider club for a number of years, and I was flying a Pawnee, came into land, and the left landing gear collapsed, and I ended up burying a wingtip into the ground and doing a hard 90-degree turn and putting the airplane up on its nose, stop the prop. So props damaged, the engine's got to be done, ribs cracked, not on me but in the airplane, and it was probably even at the time probably a $50,000 or $60,000 repair bill, but it didn't have any effect on the insurance that I was carrying on my airplane, even though they ask, have you had any accidents or incidents? Those are two different things, by the way, in the eyes of the FAA. An accident, according to the FAA, an accident is about 10 pounds more paperwork than an incident. But it had no effect because it was a structural issue with the airplane. It was not pilot error. So you have to look at those accidents. If any of them can be blamed on pilot error, I think it's reasonable to assume that something is not going to go in your favor when it comes to renewal. But if it's not pilot error, likely, probably not much effect.
Very good. DH has a really great question, and I'm going to ask DH, take a moment, give us a little more information. He says, what are the best suggestions to get insurance as a returning non-current pilot, commercial instrument rated? DH, are you an owner or a renter? And that's going to matter on this one. That's a biggie. And that kind of brings us into non-owned insurance, the actual term for what most people call renter's insurance. I do carry $1 million non-owned policy because I fly a company airplane. I don't own that thing. So it provides some additional coverage. DH comes back and says he's a renter. That's probably what you're looking for, DH, and it's not going to be all that expensive. Non-owned insurance is, Kay, I'm going to come to you with this because you're a genius. Non-owned insurance is very broad, and maybe it covers your legal bills. Maybe it covers the deductible on something else. I even know some fly clubs that are pretty close to require their members to have non-owned insurance. But have you ever had it, Kay? And what do you think the non-owned insurance or renter's average renter?
Yeah, I did have the non-owned aircraft insurance, also known as renter's insurance, when I didn't have my own aircraft, and that was the main policy. And so there is the required coverage, which is we talked about this earlier, the bodily injury and the property damage liability. But then there's optional coverage, and that is for damage to the aircraft. So that part is the one that's more expensive. The damage to the aircraft, that can be several $100s, up to $1,000, $2,000, depending on how much you're going to want to cover for the aircraft. But the required coverage, the liability piece of it, is actually really inexpensive. It could be, $100 to $200, and it's a nice cushion to any insurance that you may have with a flying club or flight school, because most likely they're going to have a deductible, and your renter's insurance will cover that deductible. Might be $5,000 or something. So I highly recommend getting that renter's insurance. It is not expensive, provided you don't get the damage to the aircraft. But it takes maybe 10 minutes to get a quote. And if you go to Assured Partners, you can find the form on there. You can see the values right there. There's a discount for being an AOPA member, and you'll get a quote right away. Pretty easy.
Yeah. And Pat, I'll come to you with this because you used to own and run a flight school. I'm a part owner of a flight school. I think a lot of people don't know. I sure didn't early in my career. When you're flying a flight school airplane, their insurance covers their airplane and them, not you, the renter, very often. So it really is worth having non-owned insurance, because if you're solo in an airplane and something happens, you really could be on your own, couldn't you?
Yeah, and we required, and some schools don't, but we required non-owner insurance. We didn't ask for crazy limits. We said $10,000 whole coverage and $250,000 in liability were adequate for us. There are some flight schools around that may require 3 to 4 times that much, maybe maybe $40,000 or $50,000 whole coverage and maybe $1 million liability. Of course, the premium goes up accordingly. But when we had our flight school, and this number is still a fairly good number for $10,000 in whole coverage and $250,000 in liability, it's about $250 a year, and that's pretty darn cheap. Because if you're praying an airplane and it has a $1,000 or $2,000 deductible, that $250 that you paid this year, it looks pretty darn good when they step in and pay the deductible. The other thing too is there's some remaining money involved there. If you have a $10,000 hull coverage, for example, we had one person damaged one of our airplanes, and it was kind of a negligent situation. So we went after the insurance company for the remainder of that $10,000 for loss of use. And so we recovered about $8,000. No, I think we had a $1,000 deductible. We recovered an additional $9,000 for loss of use, and that certainly helped ease the pain just a little bit. And if our insurance company at the flight school had decided to subrogate the claim, and that is basically go after the renter for his negligence, then the renter's non-owner policy is obligated, the carrier is obligated to step in as the policyholder's fiduciary and defend that policyholder against a lawsuit. So the policyholder may never ever know that there was a lawsuit involved, because the insurance company is going to step in and defend them. So those things alone are good reasons to have non-owner insurance, whether or not it's required. I for years when I was a renter, I said, nothing's going to happen to me. It was the height of arrogance. Nothing's going to happen to me. I'm a safe pilot. And I look back over those years and think how silly and short-sighted that decision was, and how lucky I am that something bad didn't happen that could have cost me a lot of money. So buy non-owner insurance if you're a renter.
Boy, you're not kidding. I had the same experience as a young pilot. Renter. Never even occurred to me that I had issues that I was responsible for myself. Non-owned insurance can only be a couple $100 a year, and it can cover that deductible or your legal bills or a variety of things. It's not expensive, but it's your coverage, and it really does start getting you into the game, which, as you say, Pat, it was just arrogance or ignorance on my part, and I regret that. But since then, I've always had liability coverage on an airplane I've owned. I've sometimes had hull insurance, and part of that is because I'm an A&P and I'm not uncomfortable doing my own maintenance. The high school flying club I work with, we just do liability. If we have the policy, you break it, you bought it. So labor is free, and we'll come up with our own parts. And of course, I do carry non-owned insurance and have for years, because it's a very inexpensive insurance that gives me peace of mind. And it doesn't matter whose airplane I'm flying, what kind of airplane I'm flying, what mission I'm on, does not matter. I'm covered, and that's good. I kind of want to come. Well, you know what? Let's make this a round robin, because Ms. Randy Cook asks a great question. She says, what is the future of GA, inflation, fuel, etc.? I'm going to take the white hat position. Flight schools are jamming. They're just packed with students. Pilot numbers are up. Aircraft sales, man, I'm shopping for an airplane right now, and it's not like those are depressed prices. You're not getting any smoking hot deals like you could 5 years ago. I think, actually, aside from the inflation factor that affects every aspect of life, I think general aviation's future looks incredibly bright, maybe even because of the COVID experience, where so many people thought, maybe the airlines aren't necessary. Maybe I can just learn to fly and transport myself and my family for business or pleasure to wherever I want to go using these airframes that I can rent or buy or be in a club. So Ms. Cook, I see a really bright future. Kay, do you have thoughts on the topic? I'm sure nobody's ever asked you this before, so it's
I
brand
agree
new
with you.
territory.
I agree with you also. And if you look at our AOPA high school program, the youngsters, all the youth program out there, it is just thriving. There are so many um, kids who want to get into aviation and space with all these milestones that we've had. I'm not going to list all of them. I think we all know what's going on in the industry, and it's exciting. And we have these opportunities to really get a number of youngsters into aviation. And our high school program is a perfect example of that, where we have 12,000 kids in 44 states and 340 schools, and it's just grown. We're just started this a couple of years ago, and so there's a lot of interest in aviation. And back in those days when I guess three of us learned to fly, it wasn't common to see aviation science in our curriculums, whereas now it's getting there, and I'm hoping that it's available to every kid out there, because there is it's the supply and demand, right? The supplies are low, the demands are high, the kids are interested, and we have all these great tools and resources for the youngsters. And so I just visualize the next couple of decades where aviation really is thriving, and it's going to continue in
Yeah,
that path.
I regret that it took the non-aviation public so long to latch on to what we'd been saying, that there was going to be a shortage. But yeah, the AOPA high school STEM curriculum is in 44 states. It's thousands and thousands of students are becoming exposed to aviation. I work with kids from some of those high schools. They're enthused. I just spent some time up in Palm Coast, Florida this weekend, talking to a 16-year-old girl named Jillian, who was just as impressive as she could be. She's getting ready to solo. This is not your average teenager. They never are. I mean, these are kids who suddenly see personal responsibility and planning and how they control their own future. I think all that speaks really well for the future of general aviation. Pat, would you care to take the devil's advocate position?
No, not at all. In fact, I agree with you both. And just remembering that general aviation isn't just little piston-driven airplanes. It's corporate aviation. It's life flight. It's it's all kinds of things. Commercial air travel. The big legacy carriers and some of the newer ones. That's just a small part of aviation in general. So I think overall, the general aviation market is very, very healthy. I haven't seen, looking at a big picture, I haven't seen any reduction in flight training in Houston, despite the fact that gas is still hovering around $6.50 or $7 a gallon here.
That's cheap.
It is, yeah, compared to California, it sure is. But if you look at my check ride schedule as a DPE, I'm as booked out as far as I've ever been, even today. So I think it's healthy.
That's very impressive. Scotty P has a question, and Pat, I'm going to come back to you again because you talked about this earlier. Scotty P says, how many hours a year would you expect to fly to get a decrease in your aircraft insurance? First time owner, low time pilot. I'm thinking north of 50, Pat. 100 hours a year is a lot for the average GA pilot, but I would think you're going to have to do 50 or better to have that start showing up on your insurance. Do you have a thought on the topic?
I've answered this. I've answered this almost the same answer for a couple of different questions tonight. So I'm going to go for the trifecta here. It depends. It just depends. Are you flying a Cessna 150 that an airplane that can just barely kill you, or are you flying a Bonanza A36 or $1 million Cirrus? If you're flying $1 million Cirrus, I don't care how much experience you have. If you're only flying 20 or 30 hours a year, you're probably going to get raked over the coals on the renewal, if not the initial, certainly the renewal. And I think that's probably a fair statement. I wouldn't put a number of hours on it, but the insurance company will certainly look at that as a factor.
Mhm.
There's
Go
one
ahead,
other
Kay.
thing on that. It's not just the number of hours for the whole year. They will see if from January to December or through Thanksgiving you didn't fly at all, and then you suddenly flew like crazy in the month of December. Um, yes, you have that recency of experience, but it's not spread out. They do want to see some consistency. Are you one of those pilots who are going to fly 1 month of every single year and just not fly the rest of the time? Because then you really are a rusty pilot, even if
Mhm.
you get that currency back. So make sure you spread that out. And I have to be very deliberate when I wasn't instructing. I had to be really deliberate about scheduling flights and making sure that I didn't let too much time go by, because that 1 week can become 2 weeks and then it can become 3 weeks. And if you're an instrument rated pilot and you don't get that much actual time, and you let several months go by, you're really just not being that safe. Even if you are a CFII like myself, if I like to just practice those instrument approaches, even on a severe clear day, because you go through the motions and the buttonology and all of that, that's how you not just be proficient, but you stay safe.
Yeah.
So
Yep,
it's
I like it.
repetition is the mother of skill, and you need to make sure that you're getting that periodically, not just once in a blue moon.
Okay, I'm coming back to you with Tate Hodby's question because it ties into what we were talking about earlier with hull and liability, as well as renter's insurance or non-owned. Tate says, if I own an airplane and have liability and hull on my aircraft and I hop in another aircraft, but does my insurance follow me into the next aircraft? That hull and liability policy does not, but the non-owned policy would if he had it. Isn't that correct, Kay?
Correct, correct. When you do get an owner policy, well, I can't say that everybody does this, but I know that my policy does. You automatically you do get the non-owned aircraft portion. However, what I needed to do when I originally had only the non-owned, the renter's insurance, I had to cancel that policy. And then when I got the owner's insurance, then it covered me when I went to other airplanes. But I did need to go and cancel the original policy that I had, which was only for rental aircraft. Hope that helps.
I like that. I like that a lot. Now I'm going to spring one on you that we did not brief on. They don't know this is coming, folks. This is a total surprise. If you've got a suggestion, so how any of us can help lower insurance costs for all of us, go ahead and throw out an idea. And I'm going to start with never walk away from an airplane and leave the tow bar on. Pat brought up a prop strike before. I can't tell you how many times in my career I've heard about owners or flying clubs who have had to do a rebuild on an engine and make a very large insurance claim, which affects their rates for years to come because somebody just simply left the tow bar on because it was easy and I'm going to be right back. And they start the airplane and it doesn't matter that it's not full stoppage. That's a prop strike. That's a tear down. You could be looking at 50, 60, 70,000 dollars on some airplanes. Your insurance company's not going to love that. Pat, I know I'm springing it on you, but is there anything that you would suggest to people? Say, this is how you could just lower that incident accident rate so there are fewer claims.
Use a checklist.
Ooh, I like
Oh, did
that.
I get yours, Kay? I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to add one thing in addition before the checklist: flow procedures.
Yeah.
Follow the
There you
flow
go.
procedures, and then back it up with the checklist.
And you know, we can always go back to that FAR, Pat. This is your territory, but I'm getting in there. Become familiar with all information pertinent to the flight before you fly. Know about the NOTAMs, know about the TFRs. Look into what your flight's really going to be like, not what it was like last year or the year before, but what's really likely to happen. Because if you're on top of things, you're not surprised if you enter the pattern correctly, if you use the radio using the right terminology, the odds are you're going to have a safe, enjoyable flight and you're never going to make a claim in your entire career. So that's my thought. Before I ask you for closing thoughts, I've completely neglected to say to our audience, please take a moment and click the like button and share this link, if you would, on your own personal page. We would very much appreciate, and Pat, seriously, Pat really needs the attention. He's a very lonely man. But sorry about that, Pat. I'm the lonely one. Pat's fine. His therapist worked him out. Kay, do you have any closing remarks for our audience tonight? And this has been great. I really like it. You almost never see a real discussion about insurance that's kind of free form. Thanks so much. But any closing thoughts that will improve the lives of our viewers?
No, I just want to say that the insurance decisions that you make is based on the quality of the insurer, right? So the claims paying ability of the company, that's number one. The strength of the coverage, make sure that you have the right coverage. You're not overinsured, you're not underinsured. Know what those details are, and then make sure it fits your current situation and possibly your future needs. So quality, strength, and fit. Those are the three big things for getting the right insurance.
By the way, Pablo Morelia just said, thanks, guys. Learned a lot as always. That Pablo guy, he's okay. Pat, you got anything to? And Pablo starts with a P. Pat starts with a P. These just go together. You got any closing thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, I'll piggyback a little bit on Kay with regard to selecting an insurance company. One of the questions that we did not get to had to do with how do you appeal an insurance company's decision if you think it was unfair. And that goes back to Kay's suggestion about the quality of the insurance company that you're dealing with and the financial strength. I mean, all of that kind of stuff. But specifically, the answer to that question would be every insurance company has to be licensed to operate within the state it operates in. And so there will be an insurance board of some sort in every state that licenses that company to do business in that state. So if you really think you've been done wrong by an insurance company, certainly one stop would be the state insurance board.
And by the way, I'm going to give credit to Ingram Leedy, who came in with the how do we prevent accidents and incidents to lower costs? Fly the airplane on the ground. I like that. Don't be programming your GPS while you're taxiing because the ditch is right there. Folks, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Pat, Kay, it is always a pleasure doing with you. I really love it. Thank you to every single viewer. We love having you here. Your questions are fantastic. If you have more, if there's something we didn't cover that you really want to know, you can write us right there on the screen, ambassadors@aopa.org. We really do get those emails and we really do answer them. I have to thank the spectacular Rebecca Boone, who's still flying high from a concert she saw in Brooklyn the other night. But Rebecca Boone has done a remarkable job producing this, as she always does. We'll be back here Tuesday, September 27th. 7 o'clock Eastern, 4 o'clock Pacific. I don't know, some cowboy time in the middle. I can't remember how that works. But we'll be back here. I hope you will too. We'll see you next time. Thanks a lot, y'all. Take care.
Bye. Good night.